Join Andy Cutler and I as he takes us through how easy it is to bring your SQL expertise to the data lake with serverless SQL pools on the next episode of Data Exposed MVP Edition. Join Andy Cutler and I as he teaches us how to bring your SQL expertise to the data lake with serverless SQL pools. Hi, I'm your guest host, Ree Merritt, and welcome to this edition of Data Exposed MVP Edition. Today, I'm joined by Andy Cutler, a data platform MVP since 2021. So let's get started, Andy, by telling me a little bit about what you do.
Hey, Ree, it's good to be here. I hope you're well. So my name's Andy Cutler. I'm born and working in the UK. And yes, I've been a data platform MVP very recently. And I work predominantly with the Azure Data Platform and Microsoft's data platform products in the realm of data warehousing.
Nice. So today you're going to talk about the data lake and serverless SQL pools. So let's just go ahead and jump right in.
Great. So, well, I've got the subtitle heading of Serverless SQL Pools, which is one of the features within Synapse Analytics. So I just wanted to take a second just before we jump in and start writing SQL to kind of set the landscape a little bit. So imagine you've got all this data. So you've got databases, you've got CRM systems in the cloud, you've got clickstream data, and you've got on-premises data as well. So plenty of data centers with data in there. And we've got it in a data lake. Very common pattern now where we're loading that raw data into the data lake. And people with SQL skills are wondering, can I bring those SQL skills to the data lake? A lot of stuff flying around about Spark and about Python. And the answer is yes. And this is why I love serverless SQL pools, because we can spin up a Synapse Analytics workspace very quickly and use the inbuilt serverless SQL pools engine to query that data that's in the data lake using SQL, because it has a SQL endpoint and we can connect in SQL clients. So think about Azure Data Studio, SSMS, Management Studio, Power BI, anything that can send a SQL query can connect into serverless SQL pools and get at that data in the data lake. And the great thing about serverless SQL pools, and the one thing that I always keep going back to when I talk about serverless, is its support for your common garden everyday SQL objects. So we've got stored procedures to encapsulate logic. We can create logins and we can create users. We've also got SQL users that we can create in serverless SQL pools as well. And views we're going to go into a little bit later on, but we can create standard SQL views. This is where it deviates a little bit. We're not creating standard tables where we import data into those tables. We only have external tables, and that's to cast structure over that data in the data lake. We've got functions that we can create. We've got access to dynamic management views as well, so we can see system properties within the serverless SQL pool service. And lastly, system tables. So metadata about our objects, like external tables, are all stored when we've got access to that.
Right. So I don't really see a whole lot here that I don't already deal with as in my life as a DBA. So that's good, right?
It is. It just means that if you're familiar with SQL, and you could be a DBA, you could be a data engineer or data warehouse developer that deals predominantly with SQL, or a data analyst, just bring your SQL skills to serverless SQL pools. A few little functions to get used to, but nothing you can't do in a couple of hours work, really.
Oh, fantastic. So let's jump in.
Okay. So I already have a Synapse workspace set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into the Develop tab, which is where I have all of my SQL scripts that I've created. Now, on the right-hand side, we have the data lake already visible. Now, in my data here, I do have it partitioned by year, month, and date. So I'm just going to go into one of the folders and we'll see that we have a file in there. And this is a CSV file. Okay, so it's a delimited file that I can query. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database. Okay, so it's the same syntax when you create a database in SQL Server. I'll call it SQL Data Exposed. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just going to make sure I've got my master database selected. Create that database. I'm just going to bring up the messages. And then I'm going to add a couple of extra objects that allows me to create objects and query the data lake. So I've got a master key that I'm going to set up. I'm just going to switch to my new database. There we go, SQL Data Exposed. And then we can create a database scoped credential, which is using managed identity. Okay, so it's not my user that's going to get passed down to the data lake. It's the managed identity of the Synapse workspace itself. So I run that. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm dealing with Parquet files, which is an analytical file format. And it's really, really useful to be able to query those Parquet files and set the collation to UTF-8. So once I've done that, okay, so I've got my database set up. Actually, I'm going to go in. I'm just going to query a CSV file directly. So if I click in Query CSV, okay, you can see I've got an open row set command. Again, this is a command that already exists. It's not unique to Serverless SQL Pools. And I've got a whole bunch of options, okay? Because it's a CSV, I've got to tell Serverless SQL Pools where it is, does it have a header, how is the data delimited. Now, I've just got the entire address of that file. Okay, so I'm going all the way down to a specific date folder. So if I run that query, so I'm just going to check. Now, select that database. I don't have to select that database, but we're doing it here. And I've got my results. Okay, so that is the data that sat in the data lake. I haven't imported it anywhere. It sits in that data lake and we can query it directly using Serverless SQL Pools.
So let me ask you, is there any way of creating these objects so that you don't have to like put everything and just type into SQL to query data all the time?
Yes, yeah, we do, because you're right there. We've got a whole bunch of SQL here that we'd have to type out every time we wanted to, query data in the data lake.
Right.
So what we can do is, so firstly, I'm going to create an external table. So I can create common SQL object, a schema. I'll call it LDW. I always create a schema called LDW, Logical Data Warehouse. And I can create an external data source. It's essentially a pointer to the data lake, so I don't have to keep entering the URL of the data lake every time I want to query something. And I'm going to use that managed identity credential. So every time I use that data source, it's just going to pass through the managed identity down into the data lake. So I create that. And the last thing I can do is I can create a file format that tells Serverless the file format that we're dealing with when we create the external table. Again, look, very simple few commands there, just to set the format type as a Parquet and create that external file format. And then the last thing is we create the external table itself. Now, as you can see, it's like I'm creating a table in any SQL database. I've got the external keyword there. I need that. And I'm just going to select everything. And then we've got the location. So where is the data in my data lake? What's the data source? We created that data source earlier, the pointer to the full URL of the data lake. And what file format is it? So they are required fields or required options for creating an external table. So if I run that, and now I can just select it as if it was a regular table. Now you can expose that table to any downstream applications like Power BI or users, data analysts, SQL analysts, and I've got my data nicely packaged up. I don't have to keep writing out the open row set to go and get that data every time. So that's one way we can do it. The second way is creating a view. Now, I like creating views because we can bring in one of these new SQL functions that comes with Serverless SQL Pools, and that is to do with partitioned data in the data lake. So what I've done here, I am going to use the open row set command. I'm going to point to a location in my data lake. Now, I've got 3 wildcards here. Yeah, we're going to ignore the Parquet wildcard. I've got a wildcard for year, month, and date. And what I can do, I can use the file path function. So this is unique to Serverless SQL Pools, and it enables me to return the folder partition information. And as you can see, I've just got regular SQL functions to cast the result of that to a small int for the year, a tiny int for the month, and a date for the date. Then what I can do is I can actually use those columns that I've created in that view to query and do something very important, which is called partition pruning. So this is essentially only going and processing the data from the specific folders that you want to process. And that is very important for 2 reasons in Serverless SQL Pools. Number 1, we can reduce cost, because that's how serverless is costed. It's the amount of data that you're processing. And number 2, it's performance. If it doesn't have to read a lot of data to just filter out, it's going to be faster.
Okay.
And I can specify a schema. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to select, I'm going to create my view. I'm just going to make sure that I've got my database selected. Once that view's created, I can do the same thing that I was doing with external tables, which is querying them. But this time I'm going to use one of those columns that I created using the file path function as a filter. And what that does is, as you can see, the query comes back in a couple of seconds. There is a lot of data in that data lake, and I've gone to a specific folder and I've just been able to aggregate the data from that folder using, and I keep going back to this, standard SQL syntax. Yeah, I'm aggregating, I'm using the group by, I'm using where, and that's all data sat in the data lake.
Awesome. So I love it when I can bring my skill set that I already have to something. I just wanted to ask you kind of as we wrap things up. So this lakehouse architecture that you've talked about and that I've heard about, can serverless SQL Pools play a part there?
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. So what's really emerged over the last sort of 12 months, 18 months is serverless SQL being used after the data's been processed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click into my query Delta. Now, Delta is a technology that is underpinning this lakehouse architecture. You know, there are other file formats out there as well. And what Delta does, Delta stores data, it stores schema information, but it also has some transactional consistency as well. You know, hence the lakehouse. Bit of the data lake, bit of the data warehouse there. Now, what serverless SQL Pools can do, again, we can run SQL over the Delta data. So we've got support for Delta. So at the bottom there, we just specify format equals Delta. And what I love about using serverless SQL Pools to query Delta is we don't have to tell Serverless SQL Pools how it's partitioned. We don't have to use that file path function over the Delta data. We point the data source, we point the query at the location of that Delta table, and it's going to automatically pick up the partition functions, the folders in which the data is partitioned, and I can use that in a query to filter. So I'll just select top 10. I'm not aggregating. I'm still using that filter there. So I'm going to run that. And as we can see, we get a result set back. And what's great is the event year, the event month, and the event date. They're not actually data that's in the data itself. They're the partition folders within the data lake that are just visible by using Delta. So that's what I really love about it.
Nice. No, I think this is fantastic. So big data stored in Azure Data Lake can be analyzed using Synapse Analytics serverless SQL pools, and you make it look like any SQL developer can bring their expertise to analyzing data at scale.
Exactly. Just bring your SQL knowledge and it's going to open up opportunities for you.
Fantastic. So thanks for talking with us today, Andy, about analyzing your data at scale. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. You can find links and more details about what he talked about today in the description below, and we will see you all on the next edition of Data Exposed MVP Edition.